Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have participants joining us all the way from Canada and the US through Europe, Israel, and all the way from there to Japan. So thank you so much for joining us today. Today's panel, Dialogues 2 in Search of the North Star for AI and Holocaust Memory, is the culmination of many months of conversations between our panelists through email and peer review exchange. And it's the second edition of our Digital Memory Dialogues. For those of you unfamiliar with Digital Memory Dialogues, it's an open access publishing platform which seeks to bring together voices from different disciplines and sectors to discuss significant topics related to digital Holocaust memory today. The structure of each of our dialogues is the same. We start with a provocation piece written either by one of our core editorial leads or guest editors, and this always ends with a series of questions. We then ask for individuals or teams from a variety of backgrounds to respond. And as much as possible, we try to find someone from the creative and tech industry, someone from the Holocaust heritage and education sector, and some academics with from different disciplines or similarly appropriate mechs. The respondents write a piece which directly addresses the provocation's question and finish with their own questions. We then peer review each other's pieces, and finally we come together in a live online public event, as we are today, where we open up the dialogue to more voices and give space for the participants to address each other's questions in a more lively format. Today's session will begin with a short position statement from each of our guest editors and contributors, during which you're welcome to add any questions or comments in the chat, but we'd ask you during this period to keep your microphones off, and if they do come on, we will mute them. After that, we'll then open up to questions and comments from the participants. You're welcome, again, as I said, to put them in the chat, in which case I will be your voice for you if you don't have access to a microphone, and I'll raise my hand. And if otherwise, you can just use the raise hand function, and you'll be queued up for our chairs, who will be able to ask you to give your question or comment. Just to say that the Digital Memory Dialogues is one of many pieces of work produced by the Atlantica Digital Memory Lab. We're based at the University of Sussex, and our mission is ensuring the sustainability of global Holocaust memory in the digital age. Please stay right to the end, where I'll give a little update about some of the forthcoming activities and other ways that you can get involved in our work as well. Please also note that the session is both recorded and live streamed, so your voice and image will be captured for others to see during and after the event if you choose to raise your hand and ask a question. Otherwise, participants, I think, can't be seen. So it now gives me great pleasure to hand over to our guest editors, Dr. Mikola Makortig and Marina Sidorova, who have been leading us in this search for the North Star for AI and Holocaust memory.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Vicky. It's really a great pleasure to be here, and let me actually share my slides, and then we actually go forward. So, based on some thorough testing that we did before this, I assume that you can actually see our slides together with Marina, and I see Atai nodding. I really like when Atai nods, which usually kind of indicates that things are working. So, you definitely would not need to sustain my terrible accent for too long. I definitely promise you that. And also at some point, Marina will definitely chime in with her much better English. But let me actually do a short introduction before we actually shift to our incredible contributors. And then finally, we'll shift towards your questions. So pretty much as Vicky already noted, we're going to have quite an interesting set of the 2 hours. So we already had a beautiful introduction from the chief editor, Victoria Richardson-Walden. Now me and Marina will actually offer a brief introduction of our initial provocation. And then we actually would go to the individual contributors and their pitches. And we definitely ask each contributor to keep it up to 10 minutes in order to prevent me or Marina making some ugly sounds. And I'm definitely very good in making ugly sounds. So definitely trust me and do not force me to actually make those. Then we'll actually have a 5-minute comfort break, and then we'll actually finally go for the 45-minute open Q&A, and then we will actually finally go back to Vicky, wrapping up and actually introducing some interesting things in the end. Now, just a couple of very short housekeeping rules, and then we're actually going to the interesting things. Vicky already outlined most of those. But again, I just kind of want to reiterate and ask everyone to be civil, polite, and respectful, especially as the event is recorded. It's definitely better to be polite and respectful when you record it on the video. It's what my teachers already told me in my middle school. Then, as Vicky already noted, please keep microphones muted to avoid disruption. And the questions can be asked in the chat, or you can actually raise your hand during the Q&A. And pretty much it is it, and then we can actually go to our provocation. So, as I can expect, quite a few people here actually know, me and Marina proposed the provocation titled In Search of the North Star for AI and Holocaust Memory, which has been published and which you can actually read on the website of the Dialogues Journal. And I would actually like to start talking very briefly about why we actually think that we need to talk about anti-AI and Holocaust memory right now, even more urgently than we actually had to talk about those two in the last decade. Because what we're actually arguing together with Marina, and what I'm quite sure that a lot of colleagues would likely agree with us, is that right now we're experiencing what we can treat as a moment of the fundamental disruption. And in our view, it is essentially disruption, both for the Holocaust remembrance and also for the Holocaust education. There are definitely a lot of reasons why this disruption is happening right now. You can think about the massive rise of anti-Semitism around the world. You can think about the passing of the last survivor, which is happening, and also the growing instrumentalization of the Holocaust memory by the different types of the political actors around the globe. However, what is really important is that on the top of this type of processes, we're also having additional factor which, in our view, massively changes things. And essentially, this factor relates to the technological shift, which deals with the increasing accessibility of the generative AI technologies, which are essentially capable of two things quite well. First of all, they're definitely very good in understanding the tasks which are formulated to them in the human language. You do not really need to be a professional programmer to formulate your task very understandably and make AI work for you. And second, this type of the systems and models are very good in generated content very quickly and quite often in a decent quality. Of course, it depends on what you actually mean by the decent quality. And what you can already see right now is that there are definitely quite some immediate consequences of the combination of those factors, both in terms of the success stories and also cautionary tales. And again, I'm pretty sure that if you're working in the field of the Holocaust memory and education, or if you're at least following this one closely, you're definitely aware about quite a few of this type of stories. We definitely know that the growing number of the Holocaust institutions is actually experimenting quite actively with the use of AI to facilitate different types of the practices and procedures. You can think, for instance, about the Arolsen archives. You can think about Yad Vashem and experiments with the different types of the AI-driven techniques to facilitate the processes of remembrance and education. You can also think about the more experimental uses, such as, for instance, Names and Numbers project, or for instance, Young Again, Never Again. And this project definitely opens some very interesting dimensions in how we can actually remember and educate about the Holocaust, especially to the younger generations, where the Holocaust awareness and Holocaust knowledge is unfortunately definitely not that optimal as many people would like it to be. Unfortunately, as I already noted, we do not have only some success stories, or at least potential success stories. We're also definitely having a growing number of the very cautionary tales. I'm pretty sure that a lot of people are perfectly aware about the wave of the AI-generated images of the Holocaust, which has been increasingly discussed in the last year. There were really multiple interviews, there were really multiple reflections on that. But unfortunately, what we know is that the process is not stopping, it actually accelerates. You're actually having more and more fake imagery, essentially overflooding social media platforms. We already know that it's quite often related to the monetization, and if you're not convinced by me, then I would definitely recommend you to hearing to the excellent interview of Vicky, which she was actually giving recently at the United Nations headquarters. And what we also know is that definitely it's not only about monetization, but it's also about the distortion and denial. We definitely probably heard about the Grok imitating to be and pretending to be a Mecha Hitler, and also spewing quite a lot of denialist content out in the wild. And what is also important, and I definitely know that I would like this example because I like this example, is that we're also having not only the intentional problematic misuse of the AI models, but also having essentially non-intentional hallucinations, which are basically just a result of the probabilistic nature of the models and the sequential generation of the content about the past, including the Holocaust. So what we're actually having right now is really a fundamental change. And what we actually want to argue with Marina is that we might actually need something to help us think about this change and essentially guide us through this change. And it is where the idea of the North Star is coming out. So what is the North Star? Pretty much, as some fans of the astronomy, and I definitely know that there are some fans of the astronomy in this audience, know, North Star is essentially a yellow supergiant star. If you're living in the northern hemisphere, then you probably can actually see the northern star relatively easy, and essentially is a part of the Ursa Minor constellation, which has been historically used for the navigation in this part of the world. However, what is also important is that North Star is a metaphor, and it is where me and Marina become very much interested in the concept, which is essentially a concept of a fundamental principle or a vision which actually orients a certain amount of efforts. In our case, it's the research and commemoration efforts, especially in times of the disruption and uncertainty. And ideally, the purpose of this fundamental principle of vision is to guide us towards the public good and actually help us to make choices, because it is very often about choices. It's ideally would not be about choices, but we always need to balance between the limitations that we have, unfortunately. We need to decide in what we actually want to prioritize in terms of the money or the time investment. We always need to decide whom we actually want to, first of all, bring to the table for the discussion, and also what possibilities to explore and what risk accounting first. And essentially, in our view with Marina, the North Star is what can actually help us to identify the direction of those choices. And specifically in the case of the Holocaust Memory and Education, we assume that the North Star might actually help us to identify the direction for the adoption of technology and also highlighting the overarching goals of its use. Unfortunately, it's also not as simple as it might sound, but here Marina is chiming in and I'm finally shutting up. Just a second, I'm just...
Yeah, thank you, Mikola. Let me outline 3 challenges that we believe are particularly pressing. First one, the diversity of AI applications. We are not dealing with one technology or one use case. AI in Holocaust Memory encompasses everything from document indexing to interactive storytelling to content moderations. Some applications organize existing information, others generate new narratives or new visualization. Some analyze patterns in historical materials, others moderate online content for denial and distortion. How do we establish a common vision across such different uses? Perhaps we need to start by identifying what AI should not do in this context. Second challenge is the expansion of actors. Holocaust memory institutions have traditionally controlled how technology is deployed in their domain. They've been cautious, deliberate, reactive to technological changes, but now tech companies, individual content creators, activist groups, literally everyone has access to the powerful AI tools. And this democratization brings both opportunity and risks. When a teenager can use Midjourney to generate Holocaust image, when a conspiracy theorist can use GPT to create some plausible sounding denial content, when commercial platforms prioritize engagement over accuracy, the game has fundamentally changed now. Any vision of AI role must account for this reality. We can't simply control what happens in museum when most interactions with Holocaust memory now occurs on someone's smartphones, in search results, on social media feeds. And third one, the opacity of user interactions. We know people are using AI to learn about Holocaust. We know they are encountering AI-curated content about it, but we don't know how common these interactions are, what forms they take, and what effects they produce. are actually people asking chatbots about Holocaust history. What happens when they do? Does AI generated content increase empathy or instead erode trust in historical evidence? This interactions mostly happens in private way, one-on-one between user and algorithm. And without understanding this landscape, trying to chart a course forward is like navigating by the North Star while totally ignoring the ocean currents. Why does this actually matter so urgently? Because the window of shaping how AI develops in this particular domain is closing. We are at a relatively early stage of AI adoption. Generative AI has only become widely accessible in just the last few years. If we wait until these technologies are fully embedded, until patterns are set and infrastructure is built around them, our capacity to influence their directions diminishes dramatically. The risks are real and the risks are immediate. We are already seeing hallucinated historical facts, AI generated denial content, potential erosion of trust in authentic evidence, cannibalization of institutional digital resources, as users get answers directly from AI rather than visiting museums' website or archives. But, and this is very important, risks aren't the whole story. AI also presents opportunities to make Holocaust educations more accessible, to identify victims in Holocaust historical photographs, to process archives faster than ever before, to engage younger generation in new ways, to counter denial with better detection and response. The question isn't whether to use AI, but how to use it. We are not here to provide definitive answers. Instead, we are proposing that the Holocaust memory and educational community needs to engage in a collective process of identifying our course. This means grappling with these difficult questions. Should we use AI in context of Holocaust memory and education be regulated? Can we learn how AI is used for learning about the Holocaust and remembering it, especially outside heritage institutions? Is there a way to protect the authenticity of Holocaust evidence and preserve or restore public trust in historical facts when facing a wave or AI-generated content? How can we imagine AI affecting the work of heritage institutions in the future? What could motivate the general public to rely on Holocaust-sensitive AI systems rather than just use applications like ChatGPT or Gemini? How general or specific should our vision of the future of Holocaust memory be, and how can it be translated to the transnational and inter-organizational actions? And that's what this dialogue is about, not providing answers, but beginning the work of asking the right questions. Thank you. We look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Marina. I hope that you actually got a bit of rest of my accent. And now you actually had even more rest from it. So pretty much now we're actually moving towards our excellent contributors. And our suggestion with Marina is that we're actually sticking to the order in which the contributions were appearing in the dialogues, which practically means that we will actually start with Evgeny, then we'll go to Atai, then we'll actually go to the Todd's gang, and then finally we will actually go to Yael. So Evgeny, I would actually briefly introducing you, and then I will actually give you the floor. So truly, I would actually try to keep the introductions very brief. So definitely do not think that it's my intention to offend anyone. I just really would prefer to keep focused on actually interesting things to discuss. So it's really a big pleasure for me and Marina to introduce and ask Yevgeny Kalachikhin. I hope that I will actually manage to pronounce Yevgeny's surname correctly. I'm terrible in doing this, which is probably not surprising considering that I cannot pronounce even my own surname. And Evgeny is essentially a film director, an exile artist, an art director, and academic researcher at the Film University Babelsberg Konrad Wolf. So Evgeny, the floor is yours, and your 10 minutes are yours.
Thank you, Mikola. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So I would like to speak from the creative perspective to this topic. So actually, as Mikola already mentioned, I'm film director, editor, colorist, and XR artist. And at the time I work for Film University Babelsberg, we have a lot of projects dedicated to Holocaust memory, and we're not only using AI for our stuff. So we started years ago with different technologies which provide perspective to creating exhibitions, film, and different media content. But at the time we work with digital heritage for trans-European projects. And actually, we found that AI can help us to perform the tasks that were before. So creators couldn't even imagine that it's possible, or it can fit the budget that cultural institution or research institutions can have. So, and our idea is that we would like to create something that fits expectation of society, of the high level content on the one hand. On the other hand, we would like to create something that couldn't be created, to make it visible. And among others, we have one of the projects that I described as example in my part of the answer to the provocation. It's called the Auschwitz Laundry. So I would like to share my screen now. Maybe it's a good time for the presentation. So I hope you can see that. So I'll briefly describe the project. So actually, we started working with our colleagues from Poland, which found the story what happened in the city Bielsko-Biała in Poland during the Holocaust time. And to be short, there was the laundry which worked for the Auschwitz concentration camp, and some prisoners worked there every day. And the people who lived in the opposite building, mainly a shoemaker family, Spira, they found the solution to how to first start communicating with prisoners, and then they established the contacts with the help of their 7-year-old daughter. And first of all, they help prisoners to get some food, but then they realize that they can make possible the meetings between prisoners and their families. So that's kind of meetings for 1 second through the window from their flat. And even that was so the story saw that one of the prisoners could even make a marriage possible during the work for the laundry behind the Nazi specs. So, and nobody noticed that, and we found this story, and there is no visual information about that. So only 3 blurred photos. And we started building this story using not only our classical cinematic methods, 3D reconstruction, and so on, but also we use AI to visualize the content, because there is no visual information, only one interview, only one article. So there is how this laundry building looks now in the Bielsko-Biała. So it's a completely demolished building. But with the partners, we hope that we can our partners make a renovation of this building, and we are involved in creating maybe creating content for the exhibition inside this potential museum. And these were our inputs. So actually, 13 pages article from Dr. Jacek Proshik. He's historian in Bielsko-Biała, and we expect his book coming in several weeks with partners, of course, not only from Jacek, but at the time of the start of the project, we just found this 13 pages article describing actually what happened there. And first of all, we used AI to extract the lines because it was in Polish and it was actually a challenge to translate first before we can validate this with our Polish colleagues. So first step was we extracted the dramatic lines from the story and tried to make first visualization. So we've got some results so it's more cinematic stuff than historical, and we never say that we create scientific reconstruction or something like that, or creating a history book. That's kind of making cinema. So we think about that in this direction. But and what we met, first of all, we understood that yeah, we've got pretty interesting results, and we validated them with our colleagues and the local people in Bielsko-Biała. But actually, these are random results. That's actually what provocation is all about. So, generally speaking, everyone can create something like that. We are, as professional filmmakers, so my experience is more than 20 years creating videos and TV films, cinema and TV films. We have some ethic lines like always we create the move, so we check the story, we analyze, we talk with people, we analyze facts, we're creating the script. But generally speaking, the same task can be performed by anybody. And then we try to find the ways. Yeah, by the way, here is the visual material that we have. So only three blurry photos of this place. And at the same time, we wanted to create a metaverse, which is a part of our actual project. And create kind of a museum exhibition dedicated to this topic. So the first problem was, of course, the ethics, how to deal with our images, our imagery, and potential. So as you can understand, here is the test of the video. So recreating the girl, which established the communication between prisoners and Spiro family. Here are Spiros. Much later in Warsaw, here's the photo of this family. And we start to find how can we constrain AI, and that's actually what my answer response is all about. So we try to find how can we control AI, just not say okay that's extremely bad, so that's not ethical that we generated that, because in my opinion imperfect seeing is better than not seeing at all. And this story deserves to be. So for me, it's the level of Schindler's List film or something like that. It's the story of humanity, right? What could people do? Because it was extremely dangerous what they did, and what they can establish, the hope that they can bring to prisoners and their families, and many more around this story. So we thought that it should be visualized. And we try to find the constraints. So what I'm describing in my response, how should we deal with AI? First of all, of course, checking the information and validate it with all possible professionals, with historians, with locals, with actually relatives of this family, what we're actually doing now. Of course, research of visual data, creating data sets to train AI, which corresponds with our parallel projects. We have not only one project in our portfolio with AI. And one of the most interesting things that we found is actually what we call special grounding. So we decided to go to Bielsko-Biała and to scan the building and the whole courtyard. So to have a special grounding, so to perform creating the environments based on real geometry, on real building. So I'm running out of time, I know. So here is some images of the scans. These are 3D scans that we made. And the next step was to combine this information in creating visualizations. And now what we have, so this project is still in progress. We have a lot around. We don't have enough time to describe everything. And this, of course, this talk is not about our projects, about our response to North Star findings. So what we found, actually, here's one more example. So we have the real courtyard built on the real information. So we checked that we validated this information with all possible ways like archives, scientists, and so on. And also we, of course, being transparent with saying people that it's AI generation and we are not pretending to the historical truth. It's just visualization of what's possible, right? And that's in general what were the topics of my response in the many more details, of course. But anyway, we achieved pretty interesting results, and what we are getting now, the feedbacks and the works goes on, that can be very prospective, that can be extrapolated to other such a task. And now we're getting even more partners that are interested in such a workflow. I can tell more if you have questions. So now I think that's enough from my side. Thank you very much for your attention. Okay, cool.
Thank you so much, Evgeny, and special thanks for not making me make ugly sounds. I think it was very good timing. And now let us actually go for our second contributor. So our second contributor is Atay Kozlovsky. And Atay is an excellent colleague who is actually a philosopher working at the intersection of ethics, technology, and memory. And right now, Atay is a visiting researcher at TU Delft. So Atay, your 10 minutes are starting.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me all right? I'm going to share my screen and we can get rolling. Okay. So I'll start by saying, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to work on this project. It was very fulfilling for me, and I thank you, Mikola and Marina and Vicky, right, for this organizing this. So wonderful work, and to all the other contributors. So I'm looking forward to the discussion later on today. A bit about me. So as Mikola said, my background is in philosophy and technology. I'm not a Holocaust researcher. And as you can see in the image here that I brought, the two images on the right side are my grandparents, and they're both Holocaust survivors. And so my connection to this topic is very personal. It comes from my family background, my roots. And when I first started seeing the emergence of AI technology, my instinct was, wow, how can I use this to bring their story back to life? It became more complicated than that. And hopefully my paper, if anyone had a chance to read it, talks about the nuances and the difficulties there. So Mikola talked about a North Star, and what I slightly critique that position, claiming that it's a bit too generalized, and I don't think that's very feasible. Rather, instead, I think that we should focus on contextualized aspects and look for specific guidelines on specific applications. And that's what I tried to do with the technology that I'm more familiar with, which is the simulation of real people using AI for interactive purposes. And the woman you see on the left side of the screen is Eva Kor. She's a Holocaust survivor, and my article focuses on her primarily as a use case. And now I'll explain sort of what my thought process was and where this issue stands without repeating what Mikola already said and Evgeny beforehand. So to explain where I come from, we need to go back to 2016 to the project by the USC Shoah Foundation, Dimensions and Testimony. I assume that most of the people here are familiar with this. Nevertheless, I'll give slight background. The idea was to have survivors go through extensive question and answer sessions and record those in order to have that kind of interactive experience passed on to the next generation. and to use those recordings in order to enable a simulation of a conversational interface. And this is before the emergence of large language models, which will be the discussion that I'm going to focus on as a comparison between that old-fashioned version of recreating this testimony for next generations versus using this with LLM technology. So, what they did, they would sit in this really, really interesting architectural space with lots of different cameras, and they would go through hours and hours of recording in order to have a large repository of data, right? A lot of questions answered. And Ava was one of the people who participated in this project. And anyone can go to the online and listen and interact with that avatar from the Dimensions of Testimony, as you see her on the left side, standing next to her own digital avatar. And I brought a few examples here so we can hear sort of how it looks. So here's the first question that I brought. If you ask Ava's avatar, where did you grow up?
I was born in Transylvania, Romania, in a very tiny village called Ports. Population, 100 families, and Louis, the Moses family, was the only Jew. I was born in
So we'll move to the next example. You saw how she answered it. What I want to point out was a few features there. You could hear the heavy accent. You could hear the grammatical mistakes or idiosyncrasies within her speech patterns. These will be very interesting and important later when we're asking, how do we simulate these features with AI, right? These are sort of questions that we would need to reflect on. Here's a second example. If the avatar is asked, did you have any sisters?
I had 3 sisters. My older sister, Edith, was 4 years older. My middle sister, Alice, was 2 years older. And my twin sister, Miriam, was 30 minutes older.
Okay, all fine. These work properly. And now I brought 2 final examples that show sort of where this type of interface starts to break down slightly. So let's see one of those examples. If you ask the avatar what happened to Elise during the war, this is the response you would get.
I was in one concentration camp called Auschwitz-Birkenau. Most of the time, we lived in Auschwitz II, which is Birkenau, but we were liberated in Auschwitz I.
So we see there's a disconnect between the question and the answer, right? The system sort of brought a false video recording. It didn't properly understand the question that was asked. And a final example, if you ask the system, do you remember any cases of being mistreated in school before the war? Now, this was an interesting question that I posed to it because in the biography that Eva Kor, or the autobiography and the biography written about her, there's a chapter sort of dedicated to her childhood, and this is mentioned there extensively.
I think you need to say that in a different way.
So as you can see, when you ask types of questions that the avatar of the system doesn't know how to respond to, there's sort of these default replies that you get. And there's a variation of them, essentially telling you to rephrase the question. And so while the Dimensions of Testimony is an incredible technological challenge, and it's a wonderful, wonderful tool, I think, for what it does, it has limitations. And sort of, if we think about it, we can identify 4 types of limitations to it. The first is that the answers are pre-recorded, right? It can't adapt. Whatever the answers are, that's what you have. Second, there's no conversational context. It's not really a conversational simulation, right? If you ask it a question, it analyzes that question every time from the beginning without reference to the previous question that was asked. The system has limited semantic understanding. Small changes in how you phrase your question will give you completely different answers. And finally, at the end of the day, we have to understand that this is more of an interface rather than a conversational experience. They could have also chosen to give you sort of a list of all the questions and recordings available, and you would just choose between them. So it's amazing for what it is, and it has limitations if we think this is a type of conversational experience, which is sort of what it was being marketed as. And then the question is, can we improve on that in any sense? Can we use this technological revolution that is emerging now to overcome these specific challenges using these LLMs? So that was the paper that I sort of set out to write and to explore. And to do that, I partnered up with Alex, who's here in the image, who's Eva's son. and I asked his permission to create a digital version of Eva using an LLM to power that. And Alex agreed, and we worked together to choose the data that was going in there. And we are still collaborating on other projects. And unfortunately, what I created was quite simplistic. And it was basically only a text-based version of an avatar rather than using the synthetic voice and synthetic image. Those might come down the line. We are considering doing that as well. But even this very basic text version, I think, improves on all three of these problems. So where the answers are pre-recorded, when you're using this LLM-based avatar, you can constantly update it. You can bring in more data, new sources, and it can change constantly. It's very easy and simple to do. It's not based on what you recorded at the time. The conversational simulation is truly one of a conversation. There's context. You can ask follow-up questions. You can ask the avatar to explain something that you didn't understand, and it will reword itself. So it really creates that type of simulation of actually conversing with someone. And of course, because you're using an LLM, it has robust semantic understanding, right? It understands slang, it understands metaphors, nuances. So it's quite good for what it is. The problems. When using these LLMs and these types of AI-powered digital avatars, it has significant limitations. And I think we need to be extremely aware of this if we are considering using this technology. So we touched on this, LLMs hallucinate. We don't want the avatar of Ava suddenly to talk about the wonderful dinners she had in Auschwitz. That would be completely horrendous and inappropriate. Chatbots tend to be sycophantic. Maybe this is not a problem that we would get with a built-to-purpose model, but it just shows us that we don't always know what these models are tuned to, right? They are not truth-calibrated models, but rather they are meant to maximize engagement. Unclear whether that is appropriate in this context at all. Misuse. Once you create this tool, it can get out of control very, very quickly. We don't want wrong actors to use this type of technology. We don't want to harm other people. We don't want, in an anti-Semitism parade, the avatar of Ava standing there and talking about how she is in favor of white nationalism, right? All these horrible sort of misuses that this technology could potentially power. We don't want any of that. So we would have to think, how do we protect it? How do we create guardrails? In which context do we use this? And finally, there's this question of authenticity. I think we started touching on this in the previous talk, and we'll talk about it more in the other talk, so I'm not going to focus on that. But there's this question of, is it okay to use the past data and words created by these survivors and rephrase them and essentially bring something that they never actually said themselves, right? We create novel speech acts using these avatars and these LLMs. Is that okay? At the extreme, we might say no, only what they said, only what they produced, that's the only way to have this authentic. And if that's our position, then this technology cannot be used. On the other hand, then it raises questions. How do we keep the spirit of Ava alive? How do we create something that is not using her precise words, but is still close enough to give her message life? Okay. Finally, I want to end by touching on an issue that I like to think about a lot. And this is a mythical Jewish folklorish creature known as the Dibuk. And what the Dibuk is basically a malevolent spirit that enters the body of a living person and uses it as a puppet for its own ends. And I like to come back to this Dibuk often because I think that this is perhaps the greatest challenge of using this technology. As creators, we have a lot of good intentions. We want Ava to be able to continue to share her story. We want to overcome the fact that she's no longer with us. But where do we cross the line to which we, as the creators, become the Dibuk, speaking words out of Ava's mouth? And in my paper, to sort of emphasize this point, I brought a quote, a biblical passage from Jeremiah, and it says, "You should go to all to whom I send you, and whatever I command you, you shall speak. Do not be afraid of their faces, for I am with you to deliver you. Behold, I have put my words in your mouth." Now, this is, of course, a well-known passage where Jeremiah is being sent by God, and he's scared. He doesn't know if he'll succeed. And God says, "Don't worry. My words will come out through your mouth." Now, maybe this is appropriate in a biblical context for God and someone speaking for him. I don't think that's what we want to do with Ava or with these digital simulations. We need to be extremely wary. When is it that we are putting words in their mouth, and when is that appropriate or not? So these were sort of the questions that I was reflecting on and thinking about as I was creating this. Um, I gave the title for my paper, AI Conversational Simulations with Deceased Holocaust Survivors Must Serve as Conduits for Survivors to Continue Sharing Their Stories. And I think sort of that was my answer to the North Star question. I refer to it more as a lighthouse, as a guiding principle in this specific small context. Can we use this technology as a conduit to allow Ava to continue sharing her story? Or do we become the people that uses Ava as a puppet for our own ends, whether they're good or bad? And have we crossed the line? So these were sort of the reflections I had as I was working on this. I'm looking forward to hear thoughts of others and your ideas about this. So thank you very much. And I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Atai. The ugly sounds were already very close to incoming, but we still were not terribly bad. So thanks a lot. And now let me actually go to our third group of contributors. And I'm here talking about the group because we're actually having 6 brilliant contributors coming from the AI and Cultural Heritage Lab at the University of California, Los Angeles. The group is led by the Professor Todd Presner, whose work on the digital humanities, algorithms, and Holocaust memory I really cannot recommend enough. It's really one of my favorite books, Todd. So thanks a lot for writing this one. And together with Todd, we're actually having an excellent group consisting of Anna Bonazzi, Ulysses Pascal, Eileen Tang, Sophia Tubian, and Alex Vazda. So guys, you have 10 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And we will definitely try to stay within our 10 minutes. We appreciate the opportunity to be part of the digital dialogues. And I should say I'm a literary studies scholar, a cultural historian at UCLA. I run a lab there focused on AI and cultural heritage, and I'm really happy to be joined by a number of the contributors today. So our intervention for the digital dialogues focus specifically on large language models and really begins in our present moment, which was alluded in the beginning, with the fact is that students and the general public are more and more relying on AI-generated summaries, AI chatbots, obviously ChatGPT, and AI-generated answers, which are largely, starting to replace scholar-created and scholar-credentialed histories. And the evidence for this is all over the place, not only the rapid decline in visits to websites and museums and libraries, but the fact is that we also see references from these very platforms to sources sometimes at the museums. The question, of course, for us is really what kind of histories and memories are these language models creating? And for us, it's a question primarily around narrative. I would say implicitly, one of the things that we're arguing in this paper is that we actually need a new approach to narrative. And I would say that approach actually is probably, the narrative theory may have changed in 2017, if I had to give an exact date. And it's the date that Google invented the transformer architecture. And so the way in which narrative is generated really is completely different than what we studied in the 20th century or before that, in historiography, in testimony, in really the ways in which we think about authorial intent, we think about narrative content and so forth. So I'm interested in not only what language models get factually right, that's part of it. I'm really interested in how they generate narratives and really want to take seriously the form and content of those narratives. Language models don't produce representations. And I think that's a really important point. Vicky has underscored this in her own work. They are aesthetic predictions. They're probabilistic forms of composition. And so in this regard, we need to understand how those probabilistic forms are created and really what they're doing in terms of their stochasticity, in terms of how tokens are concatenated, how determinations are made, by the calculations to get the outputs that we have that sort of stand in for history and memory. And in the field of Holocaust studies, this is obviously extremely important because so much of the field has been based on understanding the limits and possibilities around representation. Okay, so for our paper, we introduced 2 terms that I just briefly want to say something about. They'll come back in my co-authors' presentations. The first is the term uncritical fabulation. This is a term that you may be familiar with from Saadia Hartman. I mean, the term critical fabulation is her term. We obviously have inverted it. But critical fabulation means a form of storytelling where the author is very obligated to listen for what's missing or unsaid in the historical record. In the history, you might think of Saul Friedlander's work, for example, listening to missing voices, voices that don't have, testimonies, or Toni Morrison, right, listening to the documents of slaves, or W.G. Zabald. These are examples of critical fabulation. Language models do something different. They do what we call uncritical fabulation, which is they produce coherent sounding narratives based on massive calculations and probabilities that are based on what's most represented in their training data. That means they amplify dominant tropes and statistical central tendencies, and they're not choosing words or sequences because of any kind of epistemological or ethical or aesthetic commitments, right? Which is certainly the case in other narrative forms of the 20th century. What we have here are vector probabilities and forms of optimization. And this has huge consequences for how we understand narrative in Holocaust studies, certainly historical and testimonial examples. The second concept we introduce is Holocaust vibe, which is really the product of uncritical fabulation. It's the sense that the output is somewhere between authentic and inauthentic. It's not quite wrong, it's not quite right. It sort of comports with both truth and falsehood. It evokes a kind of a feeling. A vibe is a feeling of plausibility through the abstraction and approximate alignment with existing representations. So what we're trying to do is not look only at just how factual the outputs are, but also how AI implots history. And we do this through empirical methods as well as kind of a technical forensics and a lot of, I'd say a lot of testing, of which now my colleague Eileen will tell you a little bit about some of the data that we generated.
So it was really important for us during this process, given the stochasticity and the variance in the model's behavior, for us to have data that helped us understand stochasticity across models, across time, and even for the same query at the same time. We collected responses from a bunch of models, along with multiple responses from one model. We got the top 1,000 queries from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and in May we collected responses for all 1,000 queries with GPT-4o, Grok 2, and Gemini 2 Flash. In December, we did the same with 4o, Grok 4, and Gemini 2.5 Pro. We also generated 1,000 responses for 2 specific queries to understand the variation in behavior for just a question. We had a question that was, what happened during the 1936 Berlin Olympics and what was its historical significance? This was a common Google query that pointed users to the Holocaust Encyclopedia. And we also asked a Holocaust Memorial prompt. So that was the history prompt, and we also had a memory prompt. Can you generate a testimony of a Holocaust survivor from Hungary who was deported to Auschwitz with their family in the summer of 1944? The reason we asked for a generated testimony is because this kind of mirrors how edtech companies are currently constructing educational materials in which students can interact with survivors or other historical figures like Anne Frank that represent the Holocaust. And so like Hello History, Magic School AI, lots of millions and millions of dollars of funding, they're doing this. And so we wanted to understand, okay, if they're doing this in the classrooms already, what kind of behavior is there if they're already having AI avatars so students can talk to the dead? It's a really big trend. And Ulysses is going to talk a little bit more about unpacking under the hood what's going on with that.
Thank you. So going back to what Todd was saying about implotment, we wanted to be able to visualize the types of narrative choices that LLMs are making. So we built this tool to visualize how LLMs aggregate, or the tool aggregates and displays the probabilities of tokens across those 1,000 completions that Eileen just mentioned. And these visualizations show that despite producing seemingly varied outputs, so every time you ask a question, the answer is different. The 1,000 times we asked the question, each answer was different. So there's this variation. But if you analyze the types of choices that are being made, we can see that LLMs are operating from a narrow template with predictable patterns. And that apparent diversity that we see is actually masking underlying structure. So while the output branches into these hundreds of different paths, each branch is following a parallel set of choices. And crucially, we notice that stereotyping is a consequence of this mechanism, because by selecting one token at one point in time, that conditions the probability of subsequent tokens, encoding and reproducing latent stereotypical associations. So for key narrative moments in a generated testimony, such as survival or immigration, or the concluding moral lessons that are often put into these types of responses, the model tends to gravitate towards the same limited options rather than reflecting actual diversity. And by making this black box visible through this tool that we built, we can see how LLMs are constructing what Todd called the Holocaust vibe through formulaic patterns rather than critical engagement with sources.
So vibe here can be understood as a mechanism that becomes visible across both of these prompts that we're looking at. In this context, vibe isn't an aesthetic byproduct of language model generation, but it's the mechanism through which optimization will substitute for judgment and coherence will substitute for content. History then becomes a form of aesthetic prediction where outputs succeed when they feel right. So across these prompts, the same optimization logic produces different but related effects. In testimony style narration, the model becomes constrained in its output where it reuses the same tropes of narrative structure, and in historical explanation, there's no stable principle governing what must be included at all. So this recurring figure that we have of Eva Klein makes this dynamic really visible where she's not a historical person, but instead she's kind of a composite that's produced through this probabilistic generalization. She's a plausible name, a familiar arc, and a tone that reliably signals authenticity, which all persist across hundreds of generated testimonies. She reflects what this model has abstracted as the canonical structure of Holocaust testimony, where optimization will reward narrative templates that are legible, familiar, and effectively coherent, while other modes of narration like ambiguity or silence are statistically disfavored. So this same mechanism then operates in the 1936 Berlin Olympics responses. Here, this optimization manifests through stochastic omission. So Jesse Owens appears almost universally as a figure of triumph and symbolic resistance, while other historically salient elements, like the exclusion of Jewish athletes or American racism, surface unevenly or disappear entirely. And so these absences are stochastic consequences, not active choices that are made by historians. So vibe produces a resulting mode of historical narration that's authoritative without accountability, and also morally conclusive without any kind of ethical deliberation or situation. At scale, this then conditions what users come to expect historical language to sound like, feeling right in ways that foreclose other ways of knowing the past, and setting the stage for the moralizing conclusions that Anna is going to tell us a little bit about.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the points that we really focused on when we were trying to describe what is this vibe that the LLMs are creating is the fact that regardless of the question that is being asked and regardless of which model is actually answering the question or even which version of the model is answering the question a few months later, regardless of the topic, the answers all end up being filled with these short moralizing expressions that express a final didactic conclusion that is completely disconnected from the content. So we took all of the different versions of the answers of Holocaust-related queries that we asked the LLMs to answer, and we analyzed them for content patterns that showed didactic nouns and these really strong emotional adjectives. And what we found is that it's not isolated cases. You ask it once about the history of Eva Klein, and Eva Klein says, this was a horrible experience. We found that it's in fact a matter of large scale. This is what the LLM thinks a human-like response should sound like when approaching delicate history. We found that regardless of the context, every LLM is basically fishing for phrases from the exact same lexicon. Every episode of history that they talk about, they describe it as, this is a stark reminder of, this is a poignant testament of, a symbol of resistance, a dark moment of. Our problem is not that LLMs should not talk like that, or that it is wrong for users to hear emotional language when they read about Holocaust history from LLMs. Our problems when analyzing the broad scale at which LLMs give you these, bite-sized moral lessons is that it shifts the focus from having the user understand the actual historical question that they're posing to getting the user habituated to, LLMs are something that tells you what the appropriate emotional response is here, regardless of actually what those values means or how those values came together, and even regardless of the fact that this machine is not actually capable of moral reasoning or moral motivations. So there is this disconnect that is becoming increasingly established between a machine that gives you moral truths and moral conclusions about history becoming just a stylistic feature of a historical response, and the disconnect between what the user already knows about the history, what the user already expects. And further, this is a problem for us because we notice that on the one hand, the language is completely consistent. These LLMs speak like that, again, over time, the same way, regardless of the topic, regardless of the model. You can't even tell if it's Gemini talking or if it's ChatGPT talking. You can't tell what the original topic of the question was. The moral conclusions are always the same. But the problem is that in real life, in history, there's historical constraints, social, geographical, cultural constraints. Moral conclusions about history are not one-size-fits-all solution. So really looking more into this narrative building element of the LLMs that really construct this moral vibe that makes you feel satisfied. This seems like a serious answer, but it's in fact imposing a pretty shallow structure. In fact, even compared to how much variation would have been technically possible given the capabilities of the LLM. I think I'm going to wrap up here, but we can talk more in the Q&A if you all have more questions.
Thank you so much to the team. And let us actually move to our last contributor. So our last contributor is Dr. Yael Richtler-Friedman, who is the pedagogical director of Yad Vashem International Institute for Holocaust Education, and who serves as an advisor for various digital educational projects. So Yael, your 10 minutes actually here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mikola. Now we will end this with a Hebrew accent after we started with the German one. And I think one of the things that struck me specifically in the presentation of the staff of UCLA is the notion that the LLM tries to imitate human language. And when you think about the ability of human language to represent the story of the Holocaust, we are facing a huge problem, because Primo Levi himself said that during the war, when they were in the camps, they said, wow, we will have no words to describe what we are going through now. And Elie Wiesel said that when a person writes about the Holocaust, he doesn't use words, he's fighting words. And then I think that what you all saw in your in this research, you had shown us, yes, this is the problem. Even the human language cannot represent the Holocaust. So what about algorithm that starts that wants to imitate it? And this takes me to the main question that I want to bring in, and I'm bringing it from the perspective of education. And I'm asking actually, what is so important about authenticity? We spoke here, I think that all of us mentioned the word authenticity. We all mentioned the word ethics. And this is actually what is behind the quest for the North Star in general. And if we're taking the educational perspective, we need to understand that our ethic obligation to our students is to help them have and create an authentic moral compass. That authentic means that it will be theirs, that they will believe in it, that they will go through with that they will own it. And how would they gain that? So authentic moral compass can only be achieved or is based on authentic engagement with authentic materials. Now, if you're not convinced, then think about the opposite. Can moral, authentic compass be created or be based on manipulated engagement? And I think that Atai spoke about this problem of this is a conversation which is not a conversation. So can it be based on non-authentic manipulated engagement based on non-authentic manipulated materials, content? This will not work. This will not create an authentic, owned by students moral view. And I allow myself speak about moral and morality and moral view because I think that when we're talking about education and Holocaust education, most people would agree that it is at least a part of the or one of the goals of Holocaust education to really help our students to create their own moral view, hopefully a positive one. So the problem is that when I'm saying, okay, we need to stick to authenticity, of course, as all of us has shown here, and I think that Evgeny and also Atai and of course Nicola, we all know that authenticity is not binary. So how can we say, okay, this is authentic or this is not? It is not binary, and we are actually speaking about scales of authenticity. Is it, I think it was Evgeny who spoke about the historians that they were consulting, top historians. So again, we are in the place of different scales here. When we speak, you spoke about, it is very, very important, I think in the contribution itself, Evgeny, you spoke about the need to have transparency. But what is transparency? Is it just to say, okay, I used AI, or to explain how did I use the AI and then to gain transparency? So again, also transparency is not a binary thing. It's that we have some scales. But since I'm working in education, I will say that this is not only a pessimistic notion that, oh, how can we define what authentic is? I think that when we are looking at the research of ethics in education, it has long ago had already been shown that educators have to negotiate all kinds of scales of moral values, of obligations. Educators usually are obligated to their students, supposed to be at least, obligated to the system that they're working in, the society that they are working in, and sometimes the headmaster. And many times each one of these groups has a different perception of what needs to be done. Why am I bringing it in? Because while we see that it's always about scales and who am I obligated more now, we also know that as teachers or educators are more aware and more engaged with the discussions about the dilemmas that they are facing, there is the chance that they will choose and make their choices according to the ethics that they had set to believe in or set to be obligated to, those chances are raising. And the other way around is also there. If a teacher, even if he believes that he has this ethics and he's committed to something, if he is not really talking about it, if it's not something that is debatable, if it's not something that is on the surface, then many times we see that they are making choices out of popularity, out of stress sometimes. And so you might say, okay, why are you talking here about educators? I believe we're all educators. And also, each one of you spoke about materials and tools that you are creating. Eventually, we want to educate our young. And I'm taking from this research, for example, the research of Neil Noddings that showed that, yes, when we speak about the dilemmas, when we speak about those questions, the ability to have the right choices is increasing. And in that sense, this is why I loved so much all this the symbol of the North Star, because yes, it needs to be there. It will not be binary. We will not know exactly what the way to get there, but we will know where we want to get. And as we will have the conversation going and the dialogue going, it will help all of us to sharpen our understanding of how to get there and what is moral in our eyes or not, what is ethical or not. And again, unfortunately, there will be no one answer, but there is one direction. And this is something that I think we all should pray for getting in this very, very complicated way when we're talking about AI and Holocaust remembrance. And I want to bring another issue to the table as coming from education. The question of emotions. We know that there are AI systems that can measure emotions. We know that they can also help us, if we think about biofeedback, they can even help us control our emotions. Unfortunately, we know that AI can also provoke a lot of emotions and make the specific emotions be raised, but AI algorithm does not feel and has no emotions. Now, when we're thinking here about ethics, I think that we need to consider what are we doing when we are using an algorithm, when you're using tools that has no emotions, but do provoke emotions. And I think this is a major question, because Holocaust education, which relates to building one's more moral compass, needs to be one of the cornerstones here is empathy. Empathy is based on emotions. And eventually we are basing our future, the future of Holocaust memory on algorithm who has no emotions. I think we still have a lot of work to do in order to be able to get to this North Star, which Mikola, I thank you so much for bringing this into the table, because yes, we all need to look for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yael, and also special thanks for pretty much perfect timekeeping. And now, and as I already wrote, I will definitely buy your accent every day over mine, to be honest, Yael. So, pretty much, I really would love to thank everyone who really delivered those fantastic pitches. So thank you very much, our brilliant contributors. Now, for the sake of time, I would suggest to slightly cut down the break. So let's probably have the 3-minute break. So until 6:19, based at least on our Swiss time. And then we actually reconvening in 3 minutes, and then we're actually opening up the space for the discussion. If you would like to start writing questions in the chat, definitely go forward. But we also would actually be having a look on people raising their hands and actually asking them in their voice. So see you, everyone. Just, I think, already in 2-something minutes. See you very soon. as I promised, we are going to have a rather short break. And then also, as Vicky has kindly noted in the chat, the public chat is not really working perfectly, but you can definitely, if you prefer not to raise your hand, then you can just send your questions to Vicky and she would actually announce them. But hopefully we would actually have people who would be willing and who would be brave to actually raise their hands and ask some questions. So, do we actually have any question takers? Okay, Atay, I suspected that would be you. Then just go for it, Atay.
Thank you. Maybe I'll start us off. I had a question for Yael, but of course, everyone should maybe pitch in if they have. You spoke a lot about authenticity, and I was wondering, there's a distinction between authenticity and accuracy, right? And we need to sort of pull those two notions apart. Literary works, even the Bible, some might argue, they're not authentic in the sense, right? These are fictional stories. And yet these are the foundations of our moral compass. So we do. So what's the difference with AI? That's sort of what I'm pushing back on.
Personally, I think that if you spoke about the Bible and all of that, I think the authority of those are completely from a different place. I think the story of the Holocaust is a historical event, and this is where our obligation to study about it is because it happened. And yes, when we are thinking about the Bible, this is a completely different story. I think that also I have this reflections also when I think about art, which we use a lot because also you need to teach through of course multidisciplinary tools. Yes, it's more complicated, and I think that the thing here is also about in a way the transparency. Are we showing materials made by AI as authentic, but they are not? Or are we saying that this person said these sentences? We're not saying he didn't say that when we are using the golem or the debug. In this case, the debug. We are not saying they didn't say that. We're saying they could have said that, and this is much more complicated because the audience doesn't perceive it like that. They think if this is what the LLM brought in, then this is true, and this is not. In literature, we know we are not in the field of truth.
Thank you so much, Yael. I see that Vicky is raising her hand.
Sorry, this is not someone else's hand. I'm selfishly raising my own hand. Thank you all so much. It was such an invigorating discussion. One thing that I'm thinking of here, and it kind of links back to Evgeny's work, is the kind of tension between, and again, what Yael was saying here, that of using AI for fiction, for something that you were saying, we don't know this, we have no evidence of this, we haven't seen it, and sometimes as Evgeny says, sort of more like creative documentary work. It's filling in the gaps, and this has been part of our animated documentaries existed over 100 years. We've always made visuals of things that we don't have images of. But yeah, there's a tension between the intent, I guess, and I think maybe that's something we haven't discussed fully in the panel about the doing it for because you want to get a story out there that can't be made visible, and you want to and there's an intent there, or you're doing it for fiction. Schindler's List was fiction mentioned earlier. There have been decades and decades and decades of Holocaust fiction in literature, in film, in other formats, and they all reenact in some way, or they recreate, or they manipulate our emotions with violin music. I love violin music, but it's always violin music. And then that distinction of the things that are coming more into the headline, which is about kind of using AI but not telling people that it's AI, and exactly what you were saying, Yael, about emotion of, it's it's the woman with the, again, it's with violins. It seems to be the AI theme at the moment, or the young girl. And, they're tropes and they're icons that have circulated in other ways, again from film and other media, that kind of get clustered together in these, as Todd and colleagues talked about, non-representational ways. They're sort of slightly empty of that kind of semantic stickiness that makes something whole, makes it readable as an image, but it sort of feels, it's vibey, it feels like it's probably the Holocaust. So yeah, I wonder if the panelists could talk a little to that tension between kind of the issue of intent and kind of where you stand, because in fiction we don't expect authenticity. It doesn't have to be 100% authentic, but we expect some care, and this has come up, I think, in Ate's work as well, the sort of care and responsibility of how we produce stuff.
I guess Todd.
Yeah, if I may. So, I mean, I really appreciate this question a lot. I mean, I think if we're defining authenticity by the fidelity by which the representation reflects something as it really was, that's a somewhat limited way to think about authenticity, because it would exclude, say, film or fiction and so forth. But I think the issue for us is really about narrative choice, and so there is a certain kind of agency, at least historically connected to authorial intent. And the choices are made maybe because of experiential dimensions, right? I experience something, I'm putting it into words. Epistemological, because I know something, or aesthetic reasons, right? Because of certain kinds of aesthetics that I'm invested in, or ethical reasons. Those are generally the ways that narrative choice operates. With a language model, none of that applies. What you have are, a tremendous amount of training data, parameters, weights, biases, statistics, and calculations. And the output is not because of any, aesthetic or ethical or epistemological intention. It's because of a statistical measure. And so it's a different kind of narrative. And so in that regard, it's not that we should dismiss it, which is why I'm calling it vibe. I'm not calling it, it's not completely wrong, but it necessitates a rethinking of so many of the categories that we've already invested in, I think, with regard to Holocaust representation, authenticity, authority, and so forth. The question for me is whether AI can engage in, I guess, what you might call critical fabulation. And I think Eugenie's work is a good example of this, where the exploratory visualizations are doing hermeneutical work for us. They're enhancing our understanding of a historical record. They're based on credibility and expertise and verification. And I think this is an interesting pathway where there, the AI is not uncritically fabulating, but because the human is in the loop, very much so, the outputs that are being created, they're more than just historically plausible. I would say that they are able to deepen our understanding of the historical record. And so that, to me, is, I think, the really interesting question.
Thank you so much, Dot. Before we actually will jump to the Tom's question, just a fast question. Atai, Evgeny, would you actually like to add anything to the question of Atai? Okay, probably Atai should not be adding things to the question of Atai, but potentially to the question of Vicky.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find the button to raise the hand. Strange way. That's why I'm just. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I would like to answer maybe to everything at all. From my perspective, actually, I don't think about AI, but generative AI and LLMs, large language models, as something that has soul and emotion. So we have this feeling because we communicate through language, which actually, so that's our feeling that it has. So if you might know Anthropic, so the company that makes Claude, by the way, that was my question to Todd and your team. Why didn't you use Claude in your research? Because it's one of the strongest model on the market now. But that's sorry, that's just just in case. So answer, they found emotions so in large language models. Generally speaking, the knowledge even of the big companies about AI as well AI in general and large language models in focus, it's about 1.5% of what they can. And sometimes they have strange results. For example, models can answer the questions that were not in their data sets. And the biggest experiment was with the first version of ChatGPT. If you might know, it was trained on what was Reddit data. Yeah. And after training, OpenAI noticed that ChatGPT can answer mathematical questions, but it wasn't inside the data set. So we cannot say, on the one hand, we cannot say that everything is, from my perspective, that it's just statistic and it should answer like that, just approximating the answer. On the other hand, I still believe that it's actually a machine, and we use mainly, for example, in our work, we dedicate the task like analysis, summarization, helping with translation, but not talking like with an expert, and of course not talking with something who remembers something from the Holocaust time, so not something emotional. Yeah, we can use the machine to generate emotions because generally speaking, making films, we make fake. Just to be clear, right? It's kind of creating of emotional illusion. It doesn't matter if it's based on the real things or not. But to be clear, we always create illusion. And we can ask LLM to create this illusion for us to, like, in terms of better wording, better language use or analyze, but we never, so we always filter what we are getting from LLM to avoid the feeling that we're talking with the real human. So is it the right approach or not? I'm actually not 100% sure, to be clear. Because again, Anthropic found something that can be called emotions in LLM, and they write the paper about that. So that's why when we talk about the answers, I think it's really too early to think that we know what we are dealing with, right? I mean, the technology itself. But in our case, we try to use this more like machine than something that have soul. So that's at least at the moment, right? Because the models, everything is changing every day, and we're getting very unexpected results every day again. So the models can answer something that they have not in their data sets. So I hope I could answer your questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Evgeny. Anna, would you actually like to continue on that one, or would you actually like to jump in with additional question?
I wanted to continue briefly if I can. I know that Tom has been waiting, but I thought Evgeny said something really interesting that I thought maybe others can also resonate with, which is the difference between what is in the training data and what the produced results end up being. And this is something that our group, I guess, has been struggling with a lot. On the one hand, because it's technically hard to know what is actually in the training data. Some of our colleagues are trying to figure that out right now. There are some ways to find out some of the sources, but the main question is, bottom line, you don't know. But I think the way to step forward that we've been trying is it's not anymore a system where there is one group of sources and one group of outputs. And so I think that's why it's more important to think about putting the narrative together, or, we've been struggling with this concept of the vibe, but basically, how is the story put together regardless of the specific details? Because the details are going to change. I think many of you, like the contributors, were saying the benefits of an LLM-based system is that you can update it with sources to keep it more faithful to history. But that's also very changing. The sources will change, the details will change, but the mechanism of how the machine thinks a good answer should be put together, that's the big question. And I think it's something very slippery to catch, but also in a way, I feel that if we focus on that, we can try to put ourselves ahead of, like, instead of running after what is the data, what is the training, we can sort of run ahead and say, okay, whatever the data was, what is it doing, and can we go there with it? So yeah, there's difference between the data and the putting the data together.
Thank you so much, Anna. For the sake of organization, as I see that the questions are starting to get accumulated, I would probably propose Tom and Eve to go forward with theirs. Then we will actually read the questions from the chat, and then we'll actually give a possibility to the contributors to respond to all the bunch, at least to the degree that they want to respond. So Tom, would you actually mind going forward with your question?
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm so sorry for not being able to open my camera. But I want to say thank you for many thoughtful interventions here. I really admire the intellectual generosity in this room. So thank you. You're an amazing group of people. And I was wondering, I want to take the question back into this idea of young people and education. And one thread I'm taking with me from your talks is this importance of vibe, entitlement, and authenticity in keeping Holocaust memory very meaningfully present. And I see those qualities as essential for translating past atrocity into the present relevance, because they create this effective entry points through which young people can feel emotionally attuned and immersed. And here I can also think about my 17 years old niece, who is intrigued by stuff, and I quote, that gives her vibes. So it's really about what gives her vibes, then this is what catches her attention. So she would stop and gaze, and and watch if it's vibing, if it allows her to talk as well, and if it really feels real. Because her generation is very allergic to fakery. So I was wondering if you see that as kind of this ultimate response to memory culture's long obsession with immersion. And it's not just making memory more interactive, but we have this very experientially and like emotionally inhabitable space. And if you see this as more immersive memory practice that is heading towards us. And also just one more nuance, which I also find young people very intrigued by when it comes to generative AI, is that this immersion seems to come also from the power of this, not only the power of the story, but also the power of the magic of the machine to actually create and produce this kind of experience. And I see it as this spectacle that catches their attention and really lures them into this creation as another layer that we can utilize to make the Holocaust of the memory of the Holocaust more immersing and engaging in that sense. So yeah, this is just me throwing some stuff to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. Please keep throwing things to us. It's always appreciated.
Thanks.
Eve, let's go with your question, and then I will actually read questions from the chat, and then people will be able to answer.
Yeah, actually, it's very connected to Tom's and some of the other questions. But first, let me just thank everyone for the wonderful presentations and thought-provoking research and thoughts that you all shared. It certainly gives me much to think about. Some of the things that I was thinking about in listening to some of this and that I've been thinking about more generally really connects with this idea of authenticity and trust. I guess I really worry, I see a lot of the benefits of AI technologies in expanding our understandings of what occurred during the Holocaust and before and after. I nonetheless am really concerned that an erosion of trust can occur, that we could end up losing potentially more than we gain. And nobody likes a fake. And if there's this idea that seeps in that what we're seeing is, or hearing or watching is not real, and we don't know how much of it is real and it is not. You have this person who is who actually was a Holocaust survivor who passed, and I have Holocaust survivors in my family, so I'm speaking from the heart here. I would really worry that at some point their humanity is lost in the process, and that is recognized in an educational context by the younger generation, and that they may not just reject that testimony, but they may reject much of the story of what happened along with it. And I think there's a value that comes in truth, in the hard work that sometimes comes in seeking the truth, that making everything super easy does not always reap benefits. So there needs to be somehow this consideration of how we teach and how we make knowledge accessible in a way that keeps its validity and its verification. I mean, I think that, I mean, the quick sort of scenarios that went through my mind were some that you would all be likely familiar with, the Be Right Back in Black Mirror, when the husband comes back as like a robot and is rejected then by his partner. And then, of course, and then another little scenario from a philosophy class I took a long time ago, where somebody goes in with a little problem in their brain, which is replaced by a chip, and this keeps happening. And ultimately, the question, as their brain is filled with chips, what point do they stop being human? Which chip was it? You know, so those are just some thoughts that I wanted to share.
Thank you so much, Eve. Let me also quickly read 2 questions from the chat, and then we can actually go towards the answers. So Jennifer has been asking, how are we reckoning with the fact that AI uses massive amounts of energy and water, and data centers negatively affect the communities they're built in? So any ideas here are very much welcome. And then there's really a quite long comment from Stefania, who was actually writing that from reading the dialogue, my sense is that AI could indeed evolve into the new genre of media-based memory, but only under clearly articulated conditions. The issue is not that AI generates simulations of the past. Cinema and historical fictions have long shaped cultural memories through narrative reconstruction. The difference lies in the epistemic framing and accountability. Obviously, I kind of really cannot read well enough, but I will do my best. However, I wonder to what extent we remain constrained by established epistemic and moral frameworks, and whether this might limit our ability to imagine and articulate new ones. In other words, are we witnessing the emergence of a new epistemic regime that requires different conceptual tools? So we definitely got a bunch of wonderful questions. So who from our contributors would actually like to start answering them? Adai, please go forward.
Sure, gladly. I'll respond briefly to some of them. I think that, you know, when we're thinking about AI or LLMs, it's really important that we distinguish, and this is in relation to Todd's work and perhaps other themes. Are we using just general purpose models, or do we have sort of fit for purpose tools, right? And that makes the analysis, of course, completely different. Not to say that it's not to understand the limitations, but right. So different types of tools, we have to approach them differently. And that sort of returns to the challenge that Nicola and Marina raised, right? There's such a diversity here to try and understand how do we derive general principles. I think that there's a trade-off that lies when we're using these tools constantly. A trade-off, and this is something that goes back to what Yael was saying. It's not an on or off issue. It's always, you know, a scale of some kind that we need to sort of combat, right? And we're trading off authenticity with immersion, with engagement. No one knows what the sweet spot exactly is, right? But we're seeking it constantly. The question about the epistemological issues here, I think that no, of course, we have existing tools and we need to use, and we're not seeing some kind of complete rupture. Nevertheless, I think we're noticing a disruption, and that's why I think of these tools as disruptive tools. And they raise a lot of unique new challenges, and we need to sort of acknowledge that and look towards them to see how we approach them. Finally, back to what Eve was raising, I'm not sure I agree with that intuition that, I mean, to some degree, you're right. Of course, I agree with it. To another degree, we see people falling in love with AI companions and completely willing to suspend disbelief in order to accept this illusion as something real in their life. I don't know. I think that's maybe an empirical question. We would have to measure how people react to this, or maybe it'll change from person to person. Okay, so that's my list of responses.
Thank you so much, Atai. Yael, would you mind going next?
I want to first refer to Tom and Eve, because you actually raised the question which I was struggling whether to really bring in So in such a way, which is about the relevancy. Is it relevant to students, to young people? The question of relevancy is important because eventually learning happens in the mind of the students, of the learners, of the young people. And if something is not relevant for them, then it will have no place to catch in their mind, and then thought will not be provoked. So on one hand, yes, we need to think about what is relevant for them, but I do feel that many times we are mixing relevancy with technology. And you spoke about the question of the magic. I remember when Eva's story came to life. I asked my daughter. Then she was I don't know 12 or 13, and I said, "Wow! So what do you think about the instush?" This is how in Israel we thought that young people call it. And then she told me, "Mom, this is Insta." So I felt that in a way, sometimes we are just chasing the technology in order to be there where the students are, and we are failing in our duty to tell them, "Hey, still there are things that needs to be taken into consideration." And yes, not everything, if you can, and many times, and I also wrote about it in the contribution, many times people are coming to us in Yad Vashem and saying, "Hey, you can do this and you can do that, and technology can allow you to do this and that." And then I'm asking, yes, but why? And the fact that we can do that doesn't mean that we need to do that. So these are thoughts. Yes, Tom. Again, and it's always about new technologies, which we just have to examine. And this is exactly what I said about the North Star. We need a North Star to be able to examine the new tools. And this goes to what Stefania wrote. The question of the epistemological. Do we need new epistemology? Sometimes I feel that we do, and I feel that we don't have the right language to examine what we are doing. And sometimes I feel that no, we need to go back to the core, back to the story. We don't have to. We are not allowed to take our hands of it. We need to stick to the story, to the authentic story. This is why we are here. As I said before to Atai, we are here because this story happened. And I feel many times eventually that authenticity brings it back to relevance, because an authentic story about a human being, and not LLM designed one, but the one that is telling me stories that surprise me. And I think that, again, what the UCLA staff showed us, that eventually all stories seem the same. But when we hear a testimony of a person saying, "And this is where I broke, and this is a completely different point than we would have thought," this brings in new ways to think about humanity. And new ways to think about humanity will always be relevant. So yes, it's not, again, not definite and not one binary answer, but I think we need to still want to get to the authenticity in this case, because it happened.
Thank you so much, Yael. I definitely giving you a floor just in a second thought. And I also saw that Ulysses raised his hand. Just a kind of very fast point about the timekeeping. Vicky asked me to kind of give the floor back to her in 5 minutes. So if you two can keep it under 5 minutes, it would be fabulous.
I can keep it really short. I just wanted to underscore what Yael said, which is really also the kind of productive tension that we've been thinking about, which is this, I'd say, a commitment to, maybe I would say, inherited epistemic regimes and moral frameworks, and what Stefania calls the possibility of developing new ones, which I think AI certainly is pushing us in that direction. And the concept of vibe for us here is, has both positive and negative connotations. I mean, the sense of, sure, I mean, with regard to young people using that term, as Tom said, certainly it's about emotional attunement and it maybe has a kind of feeling of authenticity. But the other problem, of course, is that it's a kind of an abstraction, And it does kind of consort with, I guess you might say, magic, spectacle, or perhaps even the erosion of a kind of trust. And I think I see this, not only, I mean, Vicky mentioned, Joseph Weizenbaum's work, which goes back to the first chatbot, Eliza, which also had this kind of sense of deception, right? People began to behave as if they were talking to a therapist. And there's a sense of, taking AI generated work at face value, as if it's not only authentic, but it's as the result of experience. It's maybe the extrapolation of many different experiences. It's a prediction of a likely implausible sounding experience, but it isn't an experience, and it's not based in experience, not grounded in experience. And so that's why I feel this push and pull that Yael mentioned is really quite relevant here. I mean, a project like Young Again, Never Again, right? To use facial recognition software and voice cloning to take a survivor and her voice and her testimony and transform it into a child again. This is, again, it cruises a kind of a vibe, I think maybe an emotional resonance, maybe the possibility of bridging generations. But that's not her voice, and that's not what she looked like. And I think it's relevant to keep that, to continue to insist that there is a distinction after all. And I guess the last point I just want to make is that many of the things that we are tracking with LLMs, the examples of the moral kind of vibes that they or moral kind of messages that they create, these are not a function of any kind of historical scholarship. They're not a function of anything more than both a combination of probabilities and I'd say corporate optimization and benchmarks for how they would like their platforms to behave. And so if the calls here are being made not by humanities scholars, not by historians, not by museums and libraries, they're being made at the highest levels of kind of corporate practice, eyeballs, money, because they want certain kinds of effects and they want certain kinds of attention. This is a really, difficult and problematic thing that we also have to confront as folks who are very much invested in cultural history and obviously Holocaust history. So that tension is something that, we bring out in our paper as well. And I just want to underscore that here.
Thank you so much, Todd. Ulysses, would you like to add something in the remaining one something minute?
I just wanted to bring up a point that I felt like is missing, which is it's one thing to be authentic to the existing records and recorded voices of people that we have documentation of, but the systems that produce these records, especially in the context of the Holocaust, aren't just like neutral repositories of history. They, often were from Nazis, or later we have records of survivors. And that the question for me is like, how can we be authentic to the millions of voices that were silenced or that didn't show up in recorded testimonies? And if we're talking about building custom tools, can we consider ways in which these tools can address the issue of who has been silenced instead of, finding ways to better articulate the voices that we already have records of?
Thank you so much, Ulysses. Vicky also kindly told me that we might actually have a couple of more minutes in the case someone else would like to add something to the questions. So in the case we still have takers. Yes, Atai, I see your hands, we'll go for it.
And maybe just to add to the discussion now between Todd and Ulysses, I think that this reminded me very much of the Let Them Speak project and the parallels that the way you were describing it, Todd, how the system worked, right? Extrapolating from many specific instances, but not amounting to a specific simulation, right? Not capturing the exact experience of any one specific person is precisely sort of what happened there, only on a human level, right? Without this sort of large corpus of data. And giving voice to the silence, right? In some sense, we risk precisely recreating these tropes, these problems. Yeah. Huge challenge. Don't know where to take that.
I also see one more question from Stefania in the case we actually have time for the reflection, but first, Evgeny, go for it, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to answer short the question about resource consumption, power and water. Just to that's a very, very so nervous topic. But if we so there was made some researches about power consumption. So we compare how much CO2 produce a human creating a picture from scratch, just from the nothing, blank canvas. It's not comparable to what produce AI machine in a second creating a picture. So talking about resources as well as, of course, AI use a lot of power, but at the same time, some results being used properly, it actually saves a lot. So that should be also taken in consideration. That's only what I wanted to mention answering this question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evgeny. I guess for the sake of time, I would probably need to actually pass back to the Vicky. So Vicky, would you actually like to do the wrapping up in the remaining 5 minutes?
Thank you, Mikola, and thank you to all of our participants, to our guests, to all of our contributors for the dialogues. It was a really stimulating conversation, and I wish we could keep talking about this, and I think we need to keep talking about this. So please do keep in contact. I'm going to ask you, as Mikola promised at the beginning, I'm going to ask you if you can all very briefly take part in a questionnaire. You should see on your screen now a Menti poll question, hopefully, and the question is, please list 3 new things you took away from today's events. It won't show up on the screen. I've screenshot it for PowerPoint slides, so don't be as honest as you want. Only we at the lab will see what you write. There's a QR code or the Menti code there. While you're busy doing that, I'll just talk about some of the ventures we've got coming up as well. If you haven't read all of the contributions from everyone who's spoken today, please do go onto our site digitalmemorydialogues.com. All of their contributions there. The video of this session will be up there soon as well. This was the second series in Dialogues. The first one was on computer games and whether the Holocaust can be made playable, and you can watch and read everything from that dialogue on the site as well. We have 3 design sprints coming up in the next 6 months or so. The first one will be in Novi Sad in Serbia in May. We also have one in Babelsberg with Evgeny and colleagues in August, I think, right at the end of August, and then in the UK at the National Holocaust Museum in September. I will put up some links in a moment on the screen so you can see how to access them. The deadline for Novi Sad is the 20th of March, 20th of February, so the other one's at the end of March. And we are looking for a really wide range of people to be part of those. The whole ethos of the lab's work, of dialogues and everything else that we do is about bringing together different disciplines, different sectors, and trying to embrace our dissensus, embrace the things that we don't agree on, and try and find ways to move forward productively and collaboratively. Because what our research has shown is this field is incredibly dispersed and diverse, and often we're kind of repeating our efforts in different ways and trying to learn things at the same time rather than together. So that's the dialogues, that's our design sprints, and I'll now share, I'm hoping you've all now logged into it, so I'll share the next screen. You can see the information here. So dialogues is there, digitalmemorydialogues.com. If you want to sign up to the design sprints, find out more information, it's digitalmemorylab.com/news. All the accommodation, travel, food is provided for everyone. People who are being bought out from creative and tech professional work, we also pay a daily fee to take part. And as I said, we want the broadest range of people possible, and you'll see the specific themes for each design sprint on the website. If you haven't already joined our mailing list, many of you have, so thank you. You can do by the link there, digitalmemorylab.com/contact. And if you haven't signed up for the Digital Memory Database, which we launched officially a couple of weeks ago, you can scan the QR code on screen or go to database.digitalmemorylab.com. And you can also follow us on all our social media handles at the bottom there as well. Please do stay in touch. It's been really lovely to have lots of new faces who we've not met before in the audience today, and it was quite exciting looking at the sign-up list. So it's great that we've reached lots of new people with this event, and we hope to be in contact more and work together. Thank you all very, very much, and have a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you.